important conversation. The focus of tonight's program is on media and democracy. What happens when we can't agree on the facts? This evening's moderated discussion will explore the role of media and higher education in addressing societal polarization, disinformation, and misinformation. More specifically, it will address who gets to be the arbiter of truth in an age of polarization and misinformation. It's hard to overstate the importance of responsible journalism today, where the media has such extraordinary power to shape public perception. We all have experienced the proliferation of conflicting versions of reality and the harms that misinformation has on our society. It is essential to our healthy, high-functioning polity that the media provide accurate, unbiased information so that the general public can participate in informed discourse. What is higher ed's contribution to truth-seeking? Well, I would say we're central to it, and I should introduce myself. I'm Mary Clark. I'm the provost and executive vice chancellor of the university. And when people refer to the academic side of the house, I say we are the house. So when you ask me what is the role of higher eds in contributing to truth-seeking, I say we're central. Universities can and should serve as platforms for civil discourse, debate, and truth-seeking. Examples of programs at DU that encourage respectful dialogue and critical thinking include our non-competitive debate program, which we featured for the first time at orientation, thanks to the leadership of Professor Darrigan Silver, who I'll introduce in a moment. Our first ever Constitution Day, where we celebrated the First Amendment and read banned books in the rain. Yes, the rain wasn't planned for. And the Debate Across the Curriculum initiative, where we have students engage in a form of non-competitive debate. And I might pause there, because I was a high school debater, and the idea of non-competitive debate is a little, there's cognitive dissonance, let's put it that way. But our non-competitive debate is structured around truth-seeking. We rely on evidence-based reasoning, and we listen to understand. Indeed, I teach an undergrad seminar on the history of free speech in the United States. I'm teaching it this fall, tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, where among other things, we study the concept of academic freedom that may be familiar to many of you. Well, academic freedom is premised on faculty members' freedom to teach and research as they see fit in areas of their expertise. So it is very much grounded in knowledge creation and truth-seeking. DU is committed to fostering an environment where free expression and diverse viewpoints are valued while preserving the search for knowledge. And I would say there is an urgent need for universities to remain bastions of free thought and open dialogue as foundations of our democratic society. And indeed, I know that's what motivates me to teach a course on free speech for our undergrad students, and others who are engaged in teaching about free speech and civics are concerned in promoting students' awareness of the foundations of a healthy democracy. Indeed, we're creating spaces where students, faculty, and staff can develop the skills needed to engage in meaningful, respectful conversations on contentious issues where they can engage across difference. We're hosting tonight's event to encourage collaboration between media, academia, and the public to address misinformation and to promote a shared understanding of facts. In closing, I encourage all of you to take an active role in promoting civil discourse and media literacy in your communities and to engage with our young people around the same. And now it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's panelists, Kyle Clark, Jeremy Haefner, and Darrigan Silver. First, I'm thrilled to introduce Kyle Clark, who is no relation, or at least we haven't discovered the relation if there is. Kyle has been a reporter with 9 News since 2007. In 2016, he launched Next with Kyle Clark as an alternative to traditional nightly news programs. Next has been Denver's most watched newscast since 2018 and has won 4 Edward R. Murrow Awards for excellence in innovation. Kyle himself has won more than 20 Emmy Awards. Remarkable, remarkable. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Kyle created Word of Thanks, a micro-giving campaign supporting small to mid-sized Colorado nonprofits. To date, Word of Thanks has raised over $13.5 million to support nonprofits across the state of Colorado. In late May 2024, Kyle went viral after he moderated a debate. Woohoo!
Got some fans here, Kyle.
He went viral after he moderated a debate featuring 6 candidates for Colorado's 4th Congressional District, garnering national attention from the Poynter Institute, the Columbia Journalism Review, and even Jimmy Kimmel, who I think is seated in the front row here. Kyle has become known nationally on the importance of calling out falsehoods and local journalism's central role in restoring the public's trust in the media. Kyle will be in conversation this evening with Dr. Jeremy Haefner. Dr. Haefner is the 19th Chancellor of the University of Denver, and he is singularly focused on promoting free expression and pluralism on our campus in furtherance of what we call the 4-dimensional student experience. The 4-dimensional student experience focuses on character, wellness, careers and lives of purpose, and advancing intellectual growth. And indeed, free expression and pluralism are in furtherance of those values. Tonight's conversation will be moderated by my colleague, Professor Darrigan Silver, who is chair of the Department of Media, Film, and Journalism Studies in the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences here at the University of Denver. Darrigan is also our inaugural faculty director of Free Expression and Pluralism Initiatives here at the university, and he is a delightful colleague. Thank you all for joining us this evening. I think you are in for a wonderful conversation, which will begin now, moderated by Darrigan Silver. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. If I have one wish for everybody, it is that you have a boss who talks as eloquently about the things that matter to you, the way that Mary talks about the things that matter to me. If you do, you will have a fulfilling professional life. Thank you to those of you who've joined us for a conversation, and that is really truly what we hope tonight will be. It's a conversation between Chancellor Haefner and Kyle, but also a conversation that we will start here with our audience. And hopefully you will continue at home, and you will continue at work tomorrow, and you will continue in Colorado, because these are issues that are very important to Kyle, Chancellor Haefner, Provost Clark, and myself. I also want to say hello to everybody who's watching via live stream. 9 News is live streaming the event. Thank you for joining us from home. Mom, I promise I will call more. Kyle, Jeremy, for years the media had a hand in creating shared realities and social capital. We might not agree on interpretations of the facts, but we were all getting the same facts from a limited number of gatekeepers who decided what was news. Now, there were a lot of problems with this, particularly diversity. When you have a limited number of individuals, largely who are white men, deciding what is news, that limits what is news. But the one thing it did is it gave us a set of shared facts to discuss, and it gave us shared conversations to discuss. Um, so we're here tonight to talk about journalism and higher education's role in both discerning the truth, but also building shared dialogues, something we see less and less of today. And there's a famous quote, and if you go to the interwebs, they will tell you that there's disagreement about who said it or what the quote was, but it's basically, everyone is entitled to their own opinions, but not their own facts. So I have two questions for both of you, and I think we'll start with Kyle and then go to Jeremy. So are we now in an era where everyone gets to have their own facts, Kyle? And if we are, how can we possibly have shared conversations if we can't agree on the facts?
I think that we are, if we are not in that period, we're rapidly approaching the period where people feel entitled to their own fact set, and they revel in having their own fact set. Being wrong or even dangerously misinformed used to be something that people would be embarrassed by. And now it's often something that is celebrated as a tribal identity. And I think people are too quick to dismiss it as harmless or a passing fad or just politics or that's just Uncle Rick, because while Uncle Rick might not have his hands on the levers of society, other people who are deeply gullible or who choose to spout misinformation that they themselves do not believe do have their hands on those levers. And that's really dangerous for us. And when you talk about the lack of a shared dialogue, that's a lack of a shared national dialogue, and that's also the stuff that tears families apart. All of us know a family that has been ripped apart by misinformation. This stuff is not harmless. It ruins people's lives.
Jeremy, what role does higher education play in this discerning facts and building shared dialogues?
Yeah. Kyle, first of all, thank you for being here on the University of Denver campus and for spending so much time in your broadcasts and with our students earlier. It is really gratifying to see Channel 9 have a focus on our campus. So thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us. It is interesting, and I don't completely disagree with you that we are rapidly approaching a state where we can't possibly agree on facts. I do think, however, that, because I'm kind of an optimist when it comes to this shared dialogue, I think we can do that, but it's how we get started in the initial kind of conversations of, and I'm really encouraged by this idea that getting started with a foundational dialogue about that we have more in common than we have differences is a glimmer of hope for how we might proceed on this. But you asked me a question on higher education, and this couldn't be further, couldn't be more central to what and I think many of our colleagues are all about at the University of Denver or any university right now. Surely we all understand that a university has a mission to teach, to do great research, to serve the community. But I think the real question for tonight is, how does it do that? And for me, central to all three of those is a commitment, a principle, a pledge that we're here to seek the truth and really bring our best game to that idea. So, for example, in the research that we do, I think it's really important that good scholarship really embrace finding what is the truth without first identifying what they want to prove, right? For teaching, our commitment to students is help them to learn and to do that, to pursue this idea of truth. I think it is really important that, and this is a quote from Another one that you and I share on this one is the role of the university is not to teach them what to think, but teach them how to think. And I couldn't agree more with that statement. I think central to seeking truth, though, you've got to be able to create an environment where you can have that open inquiry, where you can ask questions unfiltered, even questions that might make us uncomfortable. You need that open inquiry, that free inquiry. And to have that environment, you've got to have a commitment to free speech, because if you have any constraints on free speech, you start to control what questions you can ask and therefore what kind of truth you can have. But at a university, it is especially important then, because of that commitment to seek truth, is to always bring evidence-based reasoning to it. And you can question the evidence, and that's a healthy part of the dialogue. And that gets at that really broad balance of ideas out there. So this seeking of truth is really fundamental to what a university is all about, in my opinion.
I mean, I love this conversation about evidence-based reasoning, the seeking of truth. But to be honest, we're fact-checking. Journalists are being told it's not your job to fact-check. Journalists are being told that that we won't come to your events if you fact-check. And you both belong to institutions that I love, journalism and higher education. But if we're being honest, they're both institutions that are getting a lot of pushback. That who are you to be the arbiters of truth? Who are you to be the ones who get to decide what is evidence-based reasoning? So Kyle, what is journalism's role in being the seekers of truth and being and focused on evidence-based reasoning?
Certainly, there's no license to be a journalist, right? Anybody can proclaim themselves to be a journalist. So I think, and this is why I love that we're having this conversation in collaboration with DU, because as much as I love journalism and believe in the fundamental importance of journalism to American democracy, it's more important to me that people have the facts, they have truth, and they have a shared reality. It's more important that they get it than they get it from journalists. If they decide that journalism is functionally obsolete for a period of time, that would break my heart. I think it would do great damage to America. It would not do nearly as much damage as if we no longer have a shared reality with which to operate from. Because when societies do not have shared realities, just basic sets of facts that people understand to be true, for them to bring their own life experiences and ideas and impressions to, without that, dangerous things happen in societies. People turn against their neighbors in unimaginable ways that suddenly become entirely imaginable when you understand that people believe untruths about other people or about situations. Because at the end of the day, most people are just rational actors, right? They're operating off of what they know. So I would love for journalists to be the vehicle for getting people a shared reality. But however America gets it, we have to maintain that, or else things will come apart in an unimaginable way. I think that journalists need to lead, to directly answer your question, we need to lead with humility, right? The reason that journalists are truth seekers, right, is because we are in a process of finding out what the truth is, all right? So gone are the days of the voice of God news anchor who was, omniscient and just, proclaimed the truth to people every night. No, every night I go out and try to figure out what's the best ascertainable version of the truth that we have. I present it to you. You know that we're still working on it. As I'm talking, my colleagues are working on it, and we come back the next night and say, we found out some new things, and we found out some new things, because it's never a final product. It's a process that we're involved in. So if people understand that the journalists of today are attempting to do a hard thing with humility, which is to find out the truth, understanding that it's often very difficult to understand, hopefully they will put value in their work, but I hope that they put more value in the truth itself.
That's really a great point. Yeah, thank you. So many similarities between journalism and higher education. That sense of humility, particularly intellectual humility, which brings along a sense of curiosity and an open-mindedness, is really what we need to foster, and it's really what's made the universities in America so great in many respects. And you're absolutely right. I think it's not, the university isn't the only place where we can develop young lives to have these values of that common reality that you have, and to really be curious in their lives. But it's an important one, just like journalism is important. And if an individual manages to figure that out on their own or through some other vehicle, through their church or their community, whatever the case may be, more power to them, in my opinion. So, no, spot on.
Kyle, you famously were, well, at least in my mind, it was famous.
Locally famous.
You were in my house. You're famous. You famously disproved some misinformation about you, that you were using a green screen to broadcast live from the forest fires. And for those of you who didn't see, the way that Kyle disproved this was by unmiking and running off into the forest. So we have the internet, we have phones, we have sites, we have people who are doing this to make a profit, and we have people who are doing this because they have bad motives. They're seeding dissent in America. They're seeding disagreement for nefarious purposes. But it's changed the way that people get news, interact with news, gather facts, build relationships. And Jeremy, from your standpoint, in some ways, we've entered the age of the death of expertise, right? Everybody can Google everything. So we no longer have shared capital. We no longer have shared facts. We're losing a shared reality. Media can now be used to break social capital rather than build it. We're in our own echo chambers where we can just listen to the same information over and over and over again. Kyle, how has this changed journalism, and how has this changed journalism's role in democracy?
Well, that's the question, right? I mean, that's what we're faced with every day. I'll tell you what the answer is not. The answer is not to retreat into easier work. The answer is not for journalists to retreat into he said, she said, and let people figure it out on their own. That's lazy, that's cowardly. The answer is not for journalists to retreat into what I call the litany of tragedy model, which is to say that the things that we should cover every day are simply the 10 worst things that happen in the community, then weather and sports and an animal story, good night, right? That's not a representation of true life. And it's an abdication of our responsibility as journalists to simply cover fires and car crashes and bad things that happen in town. I think journalism, if done right, is something that is done in conversation with community. Every night, the light comes on, I talk to people on TV, some of whom will know more about any topic that I'm talking about. There is nothing that I can talk about on television, short of my two daughters, that there isn't somebody, pardon me, my wife knows more about my two daughters than I do. There is nothing that I can talk about on television that I know more about than somebody out there, and often a significant portion of the population. So journalism is best done in community and in collaboration with them. You started by mentioning the day that the guy accused us of faking the wildfire live shots with a green screen. I ran off into the distance to prove him wrong. Here's the best part of that story. His name was Brad. Brad wrote in to say that. I doubt because Brad thought that himself, but it had started among some online, shall we call them excrement posters, who, who post excrement on the internet all day long. Some of it they may know is false, some of it they may wonder about, but they just put it out there, just sow division, dissent, that kind of thing, take shots at the media. Then it got picked up by talk radio, and it got to our viewer Brad, and Brad said, "Hey, you're faking your live shots. This is horrible what you've done." Okay, so we run off into the background to show Brad it's not fake. I am out at the wildfire. Here's the best part. Brad wrote back. He wrote back, and he said, "I was wrong. I should be careful who I listen to."
Wow.
God bless you and your family.
Wow.
Right? Brad became the star of the next night's show because we held it up and we said, could you imagine a society in which there are more people like him? He can take a joke, he can admit when he's wrong. That's the model. That's the model. That's good faith interaction from people, and more of that is the path to fixing things.
That's so true. That's humility too.
Yes, it's humility on his part. Yeah.
So Jeremy, what is the role of higher education? What's the role of the University of Denver in preparing students to be citizens in a world that is dominated by social media and the internet and the phones and misinformation and disinformation?
Yeah, there's a lot there to unpack. So
we'll wait.
Yeah. Well, let me start with social media because this is such an incredible invention that I just don't think the world really has come to grips with in terms of what are the consequences of it. Clearly, because it caught on so rapidly and so deeply, it brought us together in ways that we hadn't been or could be brought together. And that's a good thing about it. But from what I see, and of course the research that's emerging around mental health issues, around bullying of our adolescents, there's very much a dark side to social media. And I think one of the roles that universities have to play here is helping students or staff or faculty for that matter, or community members really understand the opportunities and the limitations of social media. It can drive fear. It can be divisive to us, but it can also do all these other things that bring us together in more of a like-minded way. I do worry that it creates kind of a monolithic thinking kind of mentality. The interesting thing I'll throw out there is we have a mountain campus up in Red Feathers Lakes area, and we take students up there, and cell phone coverage is spotty, and Wi-Fi can be turned on and off. And what we hear from our students often is how appreciative they are of having an opportunity where they're in a digital desert, that they don't have to be part of the social media, and they don't have to post pictures and Instagrams and TikTok and so forth. That is encouraging to me, that the students are beginning to realize there's limitations about what the influence of social media on their lives. But I think the universities are doing a lot to try to build connections to help everyone see we have more in common than we are in different. At the University of Denver, Provost Clark mentioned in the introduction that we have launched our holistic paradigm called the four-dimensional experience about academic rigor, careers, well-being, and character. And I think this emphasis on well-being and character are really particularly important to this question because in well-being, we really want our students to explore what tools they can rely on to address mental health issues, anxiety, stress, whatever it is, some of it, much of it coming from social media. And I think the character development really will help them align themselves about what their values are, what's important. And as we talk about civics, there are certain values about civics that we need to be discussing with our students about how they have a responsibility to be accountable, how they have a responsibility to show respect for dialogue and conversation, and how they have a duty as civic citizens. So we're seeing a lot more of universities really get engaged around civic education, and of course free speech and the notions of civil discourse, evidence-based reasoning converge on all this important space. So I look forward to seeing us develop even further more of a very concerted effort around developing that civic responsibility of our students.
I'd like to talk a little bit, I'm going to shift gears in a second and talk a little bit about building communities, because I know that's in building dialogue. And Kyle, you talked about that a little bit. But what tools, Kyle, do people need to navigate in a world filled with disinformation and misinformation and individuals who for profit or for poor reasons will amplify the misinformation. I mean, what do you suggest people do?
I think that more than anything, people have to be willing to change their minds. Mm-hmm. Even if you don't change your mind, the willingness to change your mind is what you need to evaluate an argument, right? And I'm not an academic, and I'm sure you could go greatly in depth on this, but just from a local news perspective, I hope that people come to the table every night with a willingness to have their perspective challenged or changed, even if it doesn't. Beyond that, and I don't know if this is unfair to ask of people who have busy lives and all kinds of other expertise and things that they do with their time, but one of the greatest things to come out of my academic experience at Ithaca College in upstate New York was just a class called Critical Thinking, taught by Ben Crane. And single best class that I took in college, and it was all about what does your brain want to believe, even if it's not true.
Yeah.
You know, to get down to the wirings of the brain, and then to step beyond that and to say, and now each of you sitting in this classroom are people who have bias. Mm-hmm. You all have bias. Everybody has bias. Every journalist has bias because every journalist is a human for now. Mm-hmm. And that's not the answer. So don't even think about that, because the person who made it has bias. But every journalist has bias. And for us to understand that and to go in to understand what about my worldview makes me want to think certain things. So the bar gets higher and higher and higher to prove something to me, for me to take it to the audience. So to the extent that people in the public want to apply that lens to their information, that's only going to serve them well. But at the same time, I worry about some of this burden shifting, where you have researchers who have spent their lives in the pursuit of truth on subjects, and you have journalists who have spent their lives on the pursuit of truth on a variety of subjects, then putting the onus on their readers, viewers, others to figure it out, to do your own research. No, that's not the deal. That's not the deal. If you trust me, if you trust our track record, know that we are making a good faith effort every single day to come upon the best ascertainable version of the truth, and we'll be back tomorrow to do it better if we can. And I hate the idea that people would be weighed down, that they now have to become the journalist and the researcher, in addition to being a plumber or a teacher or a nurse or whatever else.
I got a question though. You know, does your viewership still think of journalism as fundamentally wrapped around objectivity? Is being objective still the gold standard that they expect of you? Are you hearing that when you're out there with your audience?
I think objectivity is something that the public desires, but I think that too many journalists have used the guise of objectivity to do very shoddy work and to avoid telling the truth about things. I think what people want is the truth. I think what people want is for somebody to say, I've looked at the fact set, I've talked to the key players, I've brought to bear every brain cell I have to rub together, and this is what appears to be going on here. And not to couch that and make that something that I tell my friends at parties and don't tell you. If I know something, I tell you. That's the bargain.
Fantastic. Jeremy, what about higher ed? I mean, we have a similar duty, correct, to be experts in our areas. How do we ensure higher education is taking as much of a beating as journalism? I mean, the two institutions that I love, I hate to tell you guys, our popular opinion polls are going down, right? I love you, but not everybody does. What do we do? What do we do in this area where expertise is being challenged, and yet you and I both have PhDs. You and I are very proud of our PhDs. You and I have published peer-reviewed journals. What role do we take in a world that may not value that like it used to?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we are challenged these days because the public trust is at an all-time low for higher education. but expertise is still our gold standard. And it's still where we need to really focus. As long as the principle of seeking truth is at the core of what we're doing, I think integrity matters, right? Even in science, and mathematics is the queen of sciences. I just have to say that. But even in science, right, there are plenty of examples where researchers have gone off the rails, right? And journals have had to retract articles. That doesn't help with the public trust of what we're doing. So that integrity has to be integral to all of our work that we do in that case. And then what we do in the classroom, I think, is also really important, right? Instilling these same sort of values of seeking truth, of not just partial truth, but all sides of the truth, right? And that's hard to do. But the more we inculcate our students to do that, I think the more we build that legitimacy. I think there is a role that we can play also to help translate the work that our faculty do so that the public can consume it in a readily manner. We have this program called Public Impact Fellows, where we train faculty to take their academic research, their scholarly research, their scientific research, and put it in terms that is consumable by the public. It's not unlike what you might do in journalism based on a lot of facts, but making the public better understand the work that we are doing and how it impacts and how it is ingrained in a process that really is after the truth, I think is our best weapon to combat the public mistrust in us and really the questioning of what we're doing in that regard.
I think that's so right, because that's eye level. That's eye level stuff. And when people ask me about journalists' somewhat well-deserved bad reputation, they often want to talk to me about national journalism. And I've never worked as a national journalist. I've only worked on the local level. I'm convinced that fixing the problem is local up and not national down. And when I hear you talk about taking your work into the community in an approachable, respectful way that says, you're an intelligent person who simply is not an expert in this thing, but you care, this matters to you, let me meet you in conversation about this. That's what you can do. That's what University of Denver can do. That's what local journalists can do in respect and collaboration with the communities. And that's how we start to bind it back together.
Fantastic. The only bad part about that answer was that was my next question. So Kyle, we've talked before, and you've come guest lectured in my classes, and you know I'm a huge fan of Next, because you really, the awards for innovation are really because it was innovative, and I don't think people understand your real dedication to community building and community journalism and political journalism at a local level, something we don't always see in every community. How do you feel that's going? I mean, Next was a big experiment. I mean, you've talked a lot. Hello, 9 News corporate overlords. You've talked a lot about, in personal conversations, you've talked about your appreciation for them for letting you experiment.
Yeah.
How's that experiment going?
It's been on the air for 8 years, which has defied every expectation. It's on the air for only one reason: because people watch, right? I think that there are lots of wonderful models for journalism right now. You see them all at work in Colorado. You see nonprofit journalism. You see community journalism. You see philanthropic-based journalism. You also see commercial journalism. And I believe that commercial journalism cannot abdicate its responsibility to reach the great number of people that we still can reach with quality content, and not to do that litany of tragedy. I will say this: one of our great goals when we launched Next 8 years ago is that we saw it as a true force for community building. Some people can say that that's advocacy and journalists shouldn't advocate for things. Well, screw that. I live here. I want the community to be better. So we are going to advocate for shared values like fairness and transparency and honesty. I'm not going to tell you who to vote for, which ballot issue to vote for. That's your business. But I am going to tell you if a politician is not telling you the truth. And the way that I'm going to present that to you is by appealing to the people who like that politician to say, that is not in line with our values. That is not in line with why I like him or her, and I expect better. Because that politician is going to care a whole lot more about what their supporters think than what their detractors think. And I wholly reject the idea that accountability journalism in politics is divisive, or that fact-checking is divisive. Telling the truth is not divisive. Lying is divisive. And lastly, to that end, I would just say that Mary was kind enough, because I slipped her a 20, to mention word of thanks, which is 4 $5 weekly donations. But our goal in that, which we launched during the pandemic, weekly micro-giving campaigns every Wednesday, was to prove a theory that we had, which is that Coloradans cared about people who lived outside their community. At a time when more and more people literally wall themselves off digitally and in real life from people they perceive to be different from them, I believe that people would give to support others in communities that they may never set foot in once. And it's true. They've done it for 277 straight weeks, $5 donations at a time. They've done everything from help low-income kids in the city to build a football field down in Branson on the Oklahoma line. They're going to be up in northern Colorado this week, and they're going to be out on the western slope in a couple of weeks. And they give because they know that our community is stronger when we all work together, which is not what you will hear on cable news. You will hear that those other people hate you and they want bad things for you in your life. And I'm telling you, it's not true.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention this, and no, he did not slip me a 20. For those of you who watch his show, you know that Kyle always matches the first donations to every single charity. So that's really
well, no, it's obnoxious when people on TV tell other people to give money to a cause. I'm sorry. It's like, sir, you're in a suit, ma'am, you're in a dress. You give your own money. No, so that's the thing. It's a group project, right? And I just the promise 5 years ago was, as long as I'm employed by 9 News and have the ability to organize this, and as long as you're willing to give, we will do this. And I honestly thought we would do it for 4 months out of the pandemic summer. And here we are 5 years later, only because people are choosing to still give. And it changes the world for these nonprofits that then go and change the world for Coloradans. And it proves every single week that litany of tragedy you hear about how horrible this state is, how horrible the people in it are, and how people don't trust and don't like each other, it's not true.
Fantastic. All right, studio audience, I'm going to ask Jeremy one more question. And so I want you to be thinking of the question you would like to ask Kyle or Jeremy, because after I ask Jeremy this question, we are going to bring up the house lights, and we have a couple microphones that we'll be bringing around. We want to continue this conversation. We want to keep this conversation going both tonight and when you go home. So be thinking of your questions. Jeremy, can you discuss how DU handles this dual role of being seekers of the truth while also building inclusive communities where everyone's ideas are welcome yet interrogated?
Great question. But before I do that, just circling back to this notion of community and the local community, you know, the title of the talk had the word democracy in it. And journalism, higher education, democracy, they all kind of converge on the local community that we sit in. And serving that local community is what really works. You just gave great examples of that. I think our faculty are engaged in the Denver community and beyond. And that's where democracy really, really excels, at that local level. We've seen it over and over and over again. People are engaged, they participate, they have dialogue, they disagree. It's a great example of pluralism that was at the very heart of the founding of our country. So I think there's something that's in the intersection of those three circles that I think is worth talking about. But back to your question.
I'm not sure you need to answer. That was a great answer right there.
Well, First of all, I strongly believe that freedom of expression, civil discourse, open dialogue, diversity of ideas is not inherently in conflict with an inclusive community here. In fact, I think history has always shown that free speech supports the minority voices. That's how we made great progress with the civil rights, with women's rights, with gay rights, and so forth. It was fundamental. Free speech was fundamental to those movements and remains today, even in the discussion on Palestine and Israel. It is those voices that are often heard the loudest in this case, and so we're listening. That doesn't mean that there isn't tremendous tension and vitriol that can harm and hurt. And we've seen it on all campuses. We've seen it at the University of Denver. We do have protections while we support free speech. We also know that we enforce consequences to civil disobedience. Civil disobedience is when they break the law or break the rules. And in cases of this, where this question is coming from, it would be if they break the rules around Title VI, around discrimination, harassment, and intimidation inside our community, well, then we have to take action against that. And even if it isn't in that kind of severity, if it runs against our values and it's internal to the university can speak out against it. They can say, that person has the right to have free speech on our campus, but it runs contrary to the values of who we are as an inclusive university. And that's another role that we can play. So there's this tension. It doesn't work perfectly. It's messy. It puts people in extreme discomfort, but it is sometimes out of those moments of discomfort where you get much stronger as an individual. And in a certain sense, that experience is what makes an education at a university like the University of Denver so unique and so powerful, and the students really come up and go forward on it.
So I think at this time we'll bring the lights up, and we have a couple of microphones. I think if we have questions, then we can. So I'm gonna try to paraphrase into a question and give the chancellor a chance to respond. So Jeremy, if you want to talk, can you talk a little bit about the encampment here at the University of Denver? For those of you who are not aware, we did have an encampment that took place last spring. Do you want to talk a little bit about?
I'd be happy to.
The university's response.
Yeah. So the university has a very strong commitment to freedom of expression. We have what's called the Freedom of Expression Committee. Darrigan, you're one of the founders of that. They issued a statement that was approved by the Board of Trustees back in 2017 of this deep commitment. And as we saw protests start to emerge across the United States, and as we saw encampments start to pop up, the committee met, and we agreed that encampments at the University of Denver are a viable form of free expression. And so when an encampment did form in Denver, at the University of Denver, we of course allowed it. For the most part, it was peaceful, and it was peacefully dismantled. But it was very clear that there was a sense of great harm and hurt that was created, not directly because of the encampment, but because of the environment that the encampment was part of. We initiated a couple of investigations to help us understand really how that encampment landed. We had the Freedom of Expression Committee also issue a report. And in all three of these reports, it did indicate the hurt and harm that exists on the University of Denver campus here. This is serious. It meant that for some of our population, they experienced a hostile environment. It wasn't just our Jewish community, they were one of them, but it was also our LGBTQ plus community. So we know that it was divided, and that because of the vitriol that was shared, it was an example of free speech. Yes, it was a terrible example of civil discourse at the end of the day. So the university has a lot of work to do. We're nowhere near at the ideal of where we need to be. But we have to wrestle with this fundamental issue that we now know as a fact, that people are hurt and were harmed by the encampment. And it's that reason why I have made the decision not to allow encampments in the future. It's just not in support of our values. There's lots of ways that we allow free expression to occur at the University of Denver, but encampments are not going to be one of them moving forward.
Hefner, if you understand civil disobedience, then how could you not understand that when students were refusing to show IDs, it was their form of protest? The minute that an encampment is allowed to happen, there must be a different form to protest. How can you not understand that if that's what we are taught in our political science departments? Yet you penalize the students who were choosing to engage in that civil discourse, but you would not do the same for counter-protesters. There are students who are caught with alcohol, with marijuana in their dorms 3, 4, 5 times. They don't get the same repercussions. Is this because it was uncomfortable, because the encampment was uncomfortable for students, because they were saying something that wasn't popular or that required critical thinking? The encampment was not a threat to campus safety, and that's something that you said.
I appreciate your deep feelings about this, and I can see that you're very passionate. But if I could ask you to ask the Chancellor a question and then let somebody else ask a question, I would appreciate that.
I would like to ask why Haefner hasn't acknowledged in any serious, significant manner, hasn't addressed Israel's war crimes, and why he says he is someone that wants to seek truth, and that is what we're supposed to do at this university, but we don't have an honest conversation anywhere in this university, and I think it starts with an administration.
Okay,
I think
so
it starts
again,
with
I would just ask for you to phrase your statement.
My question is, why hasn't Israel's war crimes been formally addressed by our administration in the way that Hamas's atrocities have been addressed time and time and again?
Okay,
we have a Lebanese
thank you.
population
Thank
and
you.
a Palestinian
Thank you for
population,
that question.
and they deserve to be
Thank you for
recognized
that
as well.
question. So we will pose that question to the Chancellor.
Could you please repeat it? Because I couldn't.
I believe it was, will the university be making a statement about war crimes by Israel?
On what?
Why haven't you made a statement about possible war crimes by Israel?
Great question. Thank you for asking that question. I believe very strongly that a university at the voice of the Chancellor should be neutral.
Please let the Chancellor finish his statement.
Why is that? Why is it important that we use the university voice in a very restrained manner? Now, I will speak out when it is directly impacting our community, when there's vitriol that is directed towards a protected class, let's say. But to wander into political or geopolitical politics or social politics is not the role of the voice of the university. That's the role of our faculty and our students to engage in meaningful dialogue in this search for truth. They are the voices of the university. They are the ones that are really going to be future generations. They are the ones that need to be grappling with these issues and learning how to think through these processes here. It is not the role of the university voice, which can silence dissent. And I really believe that when you silence dissent, you're silencing free speech. And so that's my answer to that question.
Thank you. So I could ask for questions, and please do frame your questions in the form of a question.
Is it on? Okay, great. I'm going to switch back to the media, if I could, Kyle. And this election, I think, has really shown us a different role for the media. And to your point earlier about fact checking and getting the information out there, how are you and your team thinking about post-election and what the role, and specifically maybe even the next communication platform being to help our country sort of transition into the next phase of national leadership? I understand you're locally focused, but clearly this is going to have an impact here in Colorado and Denver.
That's a good question. I think when you talk about transition into the next phase of national leadership, I think different people are going to interpret that different ways, right? Depending on who they want to win, who they think is going to win. I think on a lot of levels, our work remains unchanged, which is to keep telling people the truth, no matter how angry that makes people, no matter whether that puts journalists in danger. You have to keep telling the truth, because if that's not what we're doing, then we're doing something other than journalism. I struggle with that question because it invites kind of a future casting that I think a lot of people are doing right now, because so many people have a vision of future catastrophe for the country beyond simply just, my side is going to lose, right? I mean, you'll hear folks on the left say that Donald Trump is a fascist who wants to fundamentally change America. You'll hear folks on the right say that Kamala Harris is a Marxist who wants to fundamentally change America. And I think the best that we can do is to tell people to what extent that is true, what evidence exists for it, and what is likely to be a very high pressure time coming up. If it looks anything like it did last time, there will be very intense efforts to spread disinformation. And if it's like last time, a lot of it will be born out of this state. I know so much attention gets put on, Wisconsin and Georgia and Arizona and so forth. This isn't a swing state anymore, but for some reason, an incredible amount of conspiratorial thinking comes out of Colorado. And I don't know why that is, but I do know that that makes it incumbent upon local journalists to be on the front line of combating it.
You use the examples of the hurricanes and the danger of misinformation in the recent hurricanes. Do you want to share just your thoughts there real quick?
I thought it was terrifying. I thought you had people fleeing for their lives in the face of two oncoming hurricanes in short succession in the Southeast. And you had this massive online disinformation campaign to convince people that the weather was controlled by the government, that this was some plot against people, that FEMA had not shown up. So again, this stuff is not harmless, right? It causes people to act if they believe it's true, because every single person in this room, myself included, you will act in what you think is your rational self-interest. So somebody thought it was in their rational self-interest to go armed looking for FEMA. According to that police report, that's terrifying. And you would like to think that that person would not have done that if they were not misled. So that showed me the disinformation that circulated during the hurricane, which was not limited to any one political actor. There was a lot of that out there. Just showed me the depths to which people will sink, because folks are literally out there just trying to survive, and people are chumming the waters with this stuff. It's just vile.
Have another question?
Yeah. You both talked about how in journalism and education that it's the seeking the truth, and that it's a journey and it's not necessarily a destination that you reach. And you talked about how sometimes science gets things wrong and journalism gets things wrong, and then you have to retract, and that actually hurts the reputation. How do you flip the script to say, when you admit that you're wrong, it actually builds respect, and it's a good thing to be able to say, yeah, we screwed up, instead of it's something that hurts the reputation?
Yes. You said it, right? Yeah. I mean, you said it. And it starts with on my side of the ledger, It starts with journalists no longer playing gotcha games with leaders who change their views about things, but asking them, why did you change your view? Why did you change your view? And if the answer is, I got new information. Yes, yes. You know, if the answer is word salad, obvious political expediency, not great, right? but no longer assuming malintent when somebody changes their position, right? Because we want leaders and we want experts who are open to changing their minds with new information. We have to celebrate that instead of playing games with it.
I think it gets back to that humility piece to it, because to the extent that we can really, come to grips and appreciate intellectual humility is how we become vulnerable in a certain sense and say, yeah, we don't have all the answers. And it's our role to really dive in and research what those answers are. A quick story, though, that I was just really pleased to see at. This is in our orientation just a few months ago. Derek and Silver organized a debate for all 100 or 1,1350 first-year students, 4 different sections, okay? So it's quite a task. And the debate is based on what's called a Braver Angels model, meaning there's a moderator and all of the questions and commentary is directed to the moderator instead of back and forth to each other. And that's really important because it removes the emotional, personal attacks that might occur if we just opened it up. And what I saw was, the debate would go, someone would make a statement in support of the question, doesn't matter what the question is. And then there was a couple of minutes where the other students could ask questions, again, to the moderator. And there was this one moment in the debate where an individual eloquently explained their position in favor of the question. And then there were some really good questions that came to the moderator. And you could see the speaker pause and be thoughtful and said, that's a really great question. I don't have the answer to that. So to me, that was the beginning of an intellectual humility kind of component in that student that gave me just great hope for exactly what you're talking about.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. Do we have a...
Hi there. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for being here tonight. This has been such an incredible discussion and so thought-provoking. My question is for Mr. Clark. I am a student journalist. I am the political editor for my school newspaper, and I was wondering, what would you say is the role of student journalism in an increasingly polarized world, and what advice do you have to student journalists? Thank you so much.
That's a great question. What I've encouraged people to do for a long time is to seek out the journalism that is as close to the issue that you are interested in as possible. I think sometimes people will go for big mastheads over closest to the issue, right? People will go to the Times, when actually, when COVID happened, I learned how to read more medical journalism, right? I don't know anything about medical journalism, but I knew that they knew more than most of the folks at the Times, right? So try to get as close as you can to that. Obviously, we've talked here about the difficult issue of encampments and about a public, tension about the Israel-Hamas war. Look at the work done by the student journalists at Columbia, right? They were the show, right? They did the work.
Yep.
And it was because they were closest to it. So what I would say is, here on your campus, don't worry about being all things to all people. Don't replicate work done by other journalists. There aren't enough of us left doing serious work to allow that. Whatever you're closest to, own it. Own it. And be loud and proud about the fact that you own it. Tell the other media outlets in town, there's a story on this campus. Read about it here. Maybe you want to go do your own version of it, like the New York Times does a version of the article that first appears in the medical journal or in medical journalism. But be that spark to say, we know it best, we're closest to it, watch us, read us.
Want to we are out of time. These are fantastic questions. I want to encourage you to continue, not only to continue this conversation at home, but to come back to the University of Denver to have these important, meaningful conversations that are about our community and are about lifting our community up and lifting Denver up and lifting the state of Colorado up. Would you please, one more round of applause for our two guests. If you would, please join me in thanking Mary for some great framing comments. A round of applause for Mary Clark. We look forward to continuing this conversation with you. Please do come back to the University of Denver. We'll see you.
Thank you very much. Wow, that was great. That was great.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation. Very good.
Thank you for the
That was
invitation.
awesome.
Yeah,
that was a lot of fun.
That was
Thank
great.
you. That was great.
Yeah.